Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, Friday Night Gnostic Mass on the LVCIFERIC Specktrum, Arc Null. I am Jin the Ninja, and I host a show called Threshold Saints, and I'm, of course, joined by the other hosts of the space, which is Happens Across Time and, of course, Space. This is the app called X, so we come in consent, and we also come in the idea that magic is motherfucking real, because it is. And so, thank you guys all for coming. I'll keep it really brief. I'll give Matt Mora a shout out, who is our YouTube coordinator and our social media guy. He cannot be here tonight. Of course, I'm joined by my brother on the left-hand path, the Solar Exile, who just did a great episode with another of our co-hosts, our newest co-host, Eros. To check out Eros up on her channel, on her YouTube channel. It was a great interview, and I joked about this before, but it is the one interview that if it gets better numbers than my interview with Eros, I'll actually be okay with it. So thank you guys so much for coming. Yes. Oh, and Solar actually had an episode with Paul Frederick. Sorry, Solar. Paul Frederick from the Demonosophy podcast. Yes, it did actually drop. I know, crazy. And there will be a episode with Herbie and the Kurtcast. Yes, you heard that right. Notorious viral Herbie from the Kurtcast will be on Threshold Saints dropping Sunday, and that we are doing Wang Jing's Brace Yourselves, Raped by an Angel 4. But it is not actually what the film sounds like, which is why we picked it, because it kind of is one of those weird English or Chinese to English titles that scares the hose, so to speak, but also is like actually worth talking about. So that is happening, and also a special Dharma episode with Neon Tiger will also air sometime in the next 7 to 9 days. So everybody can stay out looking for that. And Tom Will is coming out really soon. I'm trying to drop the episode on the day of his book. So his book, Tom Will Rhymes, which is like a series of rondels and like free verse, that will. So whenever that book drops is when my episode's dropping. So let's see if I can get it together. Okay. So of course, Solar Exile, Eros up. Eros is our newest co-host, but like definitely not the last. She is so incredible with like all the Greek shit that I don't know about, and astrology, and like the way that she patterns and thinks of the universe. I mean, I was speaking with this about someone the other day, just like there is some kind of special about Eros. So thank you, Eros, so much for coming and tolerating it and being like cool with like these kind of weird metamagical gatherings. And of course, Dr. William Birkin, paging Dr. William Birkin, Joshua the Branch, who just had another episode on my show on Dark Souls, which we got some interesting reviews. I guess I should have played I was supposed to have played the series before I could talk about the Gnostic elements, I guess. But in the next time, maybe. But there will be a part 2 to that coming up sometime soon. And thank you guys so much. So I'll let you all, 3 of you, introduce yourselves and plug yourselves in the way that you would like to, in the ways that you want to articulate and identify. And thank you guys all for coming. I know it's been a little while, but I'm personally really excited. I know we titled it LVCIFERIC Specktrum, but really we can go anywhere the light takes us. So, Solar, why don't you introduce yourself and anything you want to say?
Yeah, sounds good, man. Happy to be here. Hello, everyone. Good to see you, not just Eros, but Joshua too. Feel like it's been a while. I'm doing a bit of a drive-by. I'm literally driving this evening. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stick around, but happy to be here while I can. And dude, if a little kerfluffle around ethics in gaming journalism means anything to you, you should know that you don't actually have to play the game to talk about the game, to review the game, right? Like that is not what it's about. So yeah, don't let anyone dissuade you, Jen. I believe in you. I support you wholeheartedly. But yeah, I'm sort of all over the place now. Just for like this brief window, got a couple episodes dropping. Had a blast talking to Eros, kind of doing a like solo interview with that, sort of a different format than I normally kind of do as a co-host on Threshold Saints. Maybe have something else coming down the pike, and a few other things in the works. So yeah, we're sort of busy behind the scenes. But I'm entering my sort of retreat phase where you then don't really see or hear much from me for a few months. But yeah, it's been really fun as we've come into spring. So anyway, happy to be here tonight.
I forgot we do have actually something coming up, but we won't hard announce it. That's fine. We'll keep it top secret. I think that's good and healthy. So yeah, glad that you're here. Thank you so much, Solar. Eros, please introduce yourself and plug yourself and your channel and anything else that you want to say.
Oh geez. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. Check it out. Thanks for all the love, Jen. Happy to be here. I felt like the title or the topic of today's video is kind of inspired by me and Solar's interview, so that's kind of fun. And yeah, excited to see where it goes.
It definitely was inspired by that interview, which I thought was so phenomenal, of course. Yeah, because I think that I've been definitely playing with the idea of like, what is Luciferian? Am I one? Do I look at myself like, do I identify as one? What does that mean? What are the different kinds of permutations of that, and then in like the ideological, cosmological, and ontological ways that can mean? And does it even have any of those meanings, or is it just like another bullshit kind of label? So, but I definitely think, yeah, it's definitely. The illumination comes from that interview. So shout out to both of you for that, for sure. Joshua, why don't you plug yourself and identify yourself in the ways that you want to, and say any words that you want to say.
Yes, thank you so much for hosting tonight, Jen. And I like the bi-weekly format. It does kind of give like a it's been a while kind of feeling, right? I kind of like that. But anyway, yeah. So we did have an Elden Ring episode drop, and had I not fallen asleep, I had played it a lot. So maybe that person would have felt differently. I don't know. But the next one we do will be more solid. I have some really great notes that I think people will appreciate, because the game really is steeped in deep lore. So we'll even, just a glimmer here, even like hands are featured prominently. So there's a schism between the three and the two fingers, for instance, which really happened historically in the church, for instance. So, we'll delve into stuff like that, for instance. But anyway, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and it's an interesting topic. I'm already, making notes. So anyway, thanks so much again. Farewell, or not farewell, but yeah.
Okay, well, I guess as in our thank you so much, Joshua. I'm sorry, that was really great, and I agree with Solar. It is great to hear your voice in particular. Obviously, we've been doing these spaces for almost 2 years, 2 years, 2+ years, I think so, and we have all come a long way. And I just want to say, like, no matter what happens, I'm proud of every single one of us that are here tonight, and I feel like what the lodge is could not have been possible without like minimum Solar, Joshua, and then obviously Matt. It makes his contribution. So for being like a pylon in my life, at least in this space and time, thank you so much. Appreciate it to all of you. And of course, Eros. So Eros is, she is the love that exists in time and space, that exists beyond time and in space, freely in space. So, yeah, awesome. I'm really happy. So, anyways, okay. Why don't we do a room shout out? We haven't done one of those again in ages. So we have El Kami. Thank you so much for coming, El Kami. Appreciate you. I know you've come to a couple before. Fro Blucher, thank you so much for coming. One of my favorite Twitter poets. Appreciate you. Also a lodge member, of course, one of my many skywives. Cassandra, my actual skywife / the psychic visionary of the lodge, who is an Etsy store purveyor, as well as a content creator, as well as a service provider, metaphysical services, of course. And who at times LARPs as her PFP, who is Chibiusa, aka the Aeon of the motherfucking daughter. So thank you so much, Cassandra. We can't really open our metamagical workings without you. Appreciate you. Trenorist, one of my not I can't really say you're my newer mutual now, but definitely one of my most stalwart and stalworthy soldiers, some psionic soldiers. I know that like I'm gonna get like multiple likes, I'm gonna get shares, I'm gonna get we fuck with each other. So thank you so much, Trenorist. Really appreciate you coming out. Stitch, thank you so much. I know you're a big supporter of our work on the rejects and all the solo stuff that we do. Of course, appreciate you, and we love the Bina Daddy energy, of course. Yes, I know that Bina is a mother in the Westoid system, but we're going Jin's Kabbalah tonight. Truth and Dare. Sorry, Vanessa. Truth and Dies. Vanessa. Check out Vanessa's IG and Etsy store. And if you are in need of an astrologically elected tie-dye shirt of a specific Kabbalistic nature. And thank you so much for Vanessa for providing me with my own one, simply based on my shwiness, good looks, and charm. So thank you so much, Vanessa, a lodge member. We're so glad to see you here. Julius Ebola. Not sure who you are. I mean, obviously, I know who Julius Evola is. Episode 54 with Solar Exile, Doctrine of Awakening. But I do not know you as a poster. But welcome to the spaces, and thank you so much for coming. We obviously come in consent, and we do say that these are magic, so speculative, of course. Everything we say is, of course, 100% speculative, Kalachakra, speculative Kabbalah, and speculative Gnosticism. We are not advocating the particular decapitation of any demiurges, living or etheric, at this time. So basically, yeah, we're trying to remain stable on the ocean of stable lightning. So there you go. So why don't we start with something? Why don't we start with a question? Maybe that's a good discursive technique. Okay, Joshua, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so I'll just start with the one note I wrote down. The topic reminded me of a movie I watched a while back called Beyond the Black Rainbow, and it was a movie about developing. It was like a mad scientist kind of thing where he was trying to develop these psionic abilities and stuff in his test subjects by subjecting them to trauma and stuff like that. But anyway, it just made me think of the shadow of a rainbow. And since we're dealing with light and its spectrums, I just wondered if the absence of it, or if black had a symbolism in this context.
Well, if you look at our keynote for this evening, you will see that I am playing with the quote-unquote psionic or aeonic colors, one of which is pink, of course, as you would know if you listen to any of the Aeon of the Daughter Spaces. But I did not include that well-known slime green, which is also part of the aeonic colors. However, I did include black. So I think this is an interesting idea. Obviously, the way that Dharma describes it is yes, even from black, both the light and the sound and the word itself is self-emergent as the daughter. This is true. You can ask any person who practices Maha Yoga. It's a goddess called Maritzi, the goddess of victory, and she rides her corpse cart, pulled by her 9, sometimes 7 little piglets, boar piglets, who are squealing on the way down from space. And from the darkness, she emerges. So that's kind of the idea. Yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Okay, and so that made me think of Nigretto from the alchemical perspective. And of course, there's colors mentioned throughout that process. So if there were an intelligence behind a guiding hand of that process, right, maybe then we're getting into HGA type territory, like instructing you on the arts of astrology or numerology or whatever it might be, alchemy, etc. So is there a spirit in the machine? I guess also would be a question.
Hello, Jin.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, I figured that it
I thought
was
it was
me
me.
who dropped. Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. So let's assume Jin drops. He'll be back in a second. Yeah, Eros, you had your hand up first?
Sure. You know, Josh, in that movie, right? I stopped watching that movie because there's that scene where he's like flashing red light at the person. I feel like that scene goes on for forever. But like, there's also another movie where they do that, where I can't think of the name of the movie right now. Is it the same movie? I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe not. But I can't think of the movie. But Kevin Spacey is in it, and there's someone they flash this red light at him. I think he's in the military. I think it's on a military base, and they're like testing out this like psychological warfare stuff. And so they take one of the soldiers and they flash lights at him, and then he like does this giant mass shooting on the base. And so I always felt like it was like probably some MK Ultra stuff, and it's like, are they just flashing red as like the light of aggression at them? Um, that had nothing to do with your second question, the Negredo question. Um, I would, when it comes to Negredo, I always think of like Pluto and it as this purifying thing, but maybe others would have a different perspective on that.
Yeah. Oh, hey, are you back, Jin? Sorry, I was
No,
just
you
taking
can.
over coordinating for
No,
you.
you can go solar. That's totally fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know. I call on myself. Yeah. So I was just gonna say two things to that. I really like keeping the sort of like, again, locus of control, the locus of agency internal when we're talking about the intelligence that's like quote unquote guiding the alchemical process. That was definitely how I understood it, right? Because when I was doing that big time, when I was doing it bigly, I was working off of Avila's kind of schematic version, which is very, very explicit that you're essentially trying to like liberate the spirit by pursuing Negredo and then entering into Albedo, right? There's no like external thing. Now, I think that language is totally compatible with something like the HGA, like you said, or the Ankh Soul, or just the Daimon, something like that, right? But it gets a little weird if you take like a traditional, like sort of Christian perspective and you try to make it like whatever. That's not my shtick. So never done that. Don't like that. Not a huge fan. But yeah, it's a sort of the way that, again, like someone like Evola described it, which is also like a functional meditation. It's this like almost like never ending, like deepening, like sinking into oneself. And essentially you have to completely settle the mind. Like Crowley would say that you have to achieve samadhi, quote unquote, right? I sort of hate the way that all those early 20th century Western guys talk about samadhi, but it's that, right? You have to still the mind to the point where the what they're going to call the egoic self sort of dissolves, right? When you stop feeling, or like what you might call the persona or something like that, right? It's not consciousness doesn't stop, but you have to allow the sort of shell to sort of slough away. And very often that is accompanied in a very physical sense by like this sinking feeling, and you feel it in kind of like your stomach and up through your chest. It's a very like noticeable thing, and you have to, again, not go into analytic mode when that happens, right? Because your brain will want to start telling a story about what you're doing, right, as you sink into deeper and deeper Negredo. And then if you're able to basically go all the way without like pulling yourself out of it, either physiologically or rationally, then it'll usually just start on its own. You'll enter into, well, something happens, and it's that's welcome to the next phase, right? I also just want to say, so I watched Beyond the Black Rainbow way back in the day before I was doing any like serious meditation, esoteric stuff, and now I have such a funny perspective on that, because especially when I'm in like a black environment, either just closing my eyes in the dark, blindfolded, sensory deprivation, anything like that, it's very obvious to me that the sort of the quote unquote emptiness of the void of the black is actually sort of the most pregnant and just alive with light. And particularly what, at least for where I'm at right now, a lot of that is like essentially this like neon, like swirling rainbow light. It's very, very pronounced, and it basically is there all the time. But you're used to just kind of operating in the world, identifying objects and stuff like that, right? So it's only when you sort of strip away that quote unquote external like sensory like input, i.e. when you've isolated yourself in the sort of black, that you get this like rainbow, the stuff starts to just kind of go, right? So yeah, it's just I just have a sort of different relation to the concept of beyond the black rainbow, especially the way that the when you're doing like rainbow vision, like Tokyo practices, the way the spectrum goes in that, to where the sort of like neon rainbow edge of the rainbow is. It's kind of interesting if you want to line that up with Kabbalah. But anyway, not my horse, not my race. So anyway.
That was great. Thank you all for faring the fair weathers of the aether wave as I dropped. But no, I thought that was great. When Solar was speaking, I was reminded of what we call Nogtong, which is the black ground tonkas that are used in very ferocious practices. Online, if you see people post them, they're usually outlined in green, or not green, excuse me, not green. Sorry, my bad. Gold leaf. Um, I guess that Chrysopia is kind of green. There's a greening that happens, so maybe I'm not totally off on that. But it is gold and gold leaf. And but if you understand different kinds of tantra, not maybe just the ones for the normies, sometimes they will also be outlined in pink, and which is crushed coral. So this is really important. And another thing that I was reminded of when Solar was speaking is the sort of tantric numerology of the samadhi consciousness, if you want to call it that, which is the 51 or the 1 and 5. So that is the how that would be numbered. So that is quite interesting. Also ties into Vajra Kilaya Mandala in a way, in an interesting positionality. So. But Joshua, yeah, I agree. The Negrito, so the goddess emerges in the splendor of the squealing piglets. That's how it's thought of. But the sound of the piglets is actually light being liberated from matter. So they do arise in a spectral force, right? Because it's unclarified at that point. That's how we would consider it. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add real quickly. There's I almost forgot. We're trying to talk about Lucifer. The way that the light, this sort of interior light, sort of bursts forth in perception as you move from Negredo to Albedo is actually very like quote unquote like Luciferian in the sort of like dramatic cultural images that we associate with the sort of like either the fall of Lucifer, but particularly like Lucifer's emergence in the full resplendence of light. That's a very sort of powerful nexus of cultural images, um, that were like familiar, like William Blake's engravings and stuff like that, right? That actually resonates like on a fairly like powerful level, at least from my experiences with the way. And again, Evola describes this exactly, and it tracks for me, with the again sort of once you're able to like quiet everything, shut everything down, slough off the husk, um, the bursting forth of the sort of light, that you are identifying with, that is you. But anyway, yeah, it is a very like Luciferian moment, if you will.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, this is why I thought I could, like, quote unquote, return to left hand path Catholicism at one point in my retardation, my earlier stages, because I thought, okay, well, it's there. Like, the imagery is there, or I can at least imagine it from the sort of pieces of mythology, the fallen terma, we'll call it, that is in a more sort of Gothic presentation of Catholicism. I thought, okay, well, I can sort of achieve a kind of Luciferic visualization through these kind of exterior density prayers and practices. But alas, it was not. But Buddhism did not, Dharma did not fail me, Tantra did not fail me, because it does exist in there. So I agree, though, that the William Blake stuff, I think, is very profound. I think all of the kind of Lucifer Falling, Lucifer Rising, obviously the Kenneth Anger film, obviously the Alejandro Jodorowsky film, who we often talk about in these spaces because he was and is grade A magician. So, all his films deal with, I would say, a very strong Luciferic force. Yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Well, what came to my mind here when you guys were talking about the Black Room and we were discussing Nigredo as well, I was reminded of when the human sperm and egg unite, that there's a zinc fueled reaction that results in a flash of light. And so I think that kind of harkens back to like the first cause or spark of life, and this association with the logos, or the three mothers, etc. So some of those things maybe come to mind. So when you're in the darkness like that, are there syllables that come to mind, right? Do they visit you in the womb? Is your goal to recreate that Augustine moment when you were conceived? You find the mind at the beginning, I guess.
Definitely, there's an idea that there are bijas that are more primordial than others. This is kind of a sophisticated tantric argument of like which one arises first. If you want to say which the bijas are just the seed syllables associated with each deity, they can also be said to be the deity. So it depends on your level of understanding, of course. But for our purposes, we'll just say the deity is quote unquote real because I think that this is the most. It's the easiest way for people to just understand, but it obviously you'll know if you've ever listened to me or my show or the Grey Lodge or me on any other show. I tend to take a more what I'm calling a post-theistic approach to the existence of deities. So I'm not either denying or like reifying their existence per se. So we'll say that. But so the goddess that I mentioned that rides the corpse cart with her 7 or to 9 boar piglets, she is the goddess of the Little Dipper. Why do I bring that up? Because they're non-traditional sort of luminaries in our sort of what we think of as the prominent stars in or a less Hyperborean, we'll call it, worldview. So, but the more Himalayan you go, the more important, and certainly in China, the very, very extremely important because it's like the silent turning of the wheel. That's how it's described. She is the wheel that turns the wheel before the wheel actually turns. So it's kind of like setting something in motion that is not necessarily accompanied by the traditional wheel turning, which is obviously the Big Dipper. It's sort of the rotation around that Hyperborean black sun matrix. She travels with her boar cart and turns around, and then the squeals are kind of how it's often described is like there's a sound of rust, and it's kind of like working through the axis. And so, but the boars are indomitable. That's one of her keywords: indomitable, invincible, invisible, as well as ungraspable, meaning that the wheel is always turning. That's why I've always tried to emphasize that point, even though it doesn't necessarily make for the best kind of clips where you're saying like, oh yeah, we're going into the Satya Yuga right now. But to like bring it back to your actual question, Joshua, is I definitely think that the idea is kind of like a birth of a new world, but that is a perceptual state. That is like the emergence of the light from the black ground every time. So if you're doing it in meditation, then the quote unquote rebirth is accumulating or recognizing or realizing or awakening the light so that you perceive that kind of emergence for the first time. So I do agree that also can be a kind of conceptual place that she's referring to. But then if you're talking about bijas, I don't have a problem saying her bija. It's Mam, M-A-M. There is a similarity to obviously one of the 3 mother letters from the Hebrew Kabbalah. We don't have to go into that, but it is considered to be golden. Interesting, the letter when it is in its like quote unquote color state, but it's also invisible, and so it's more like invisible light, but it flashes gold, and it also arises from the earth, meaning the material earth. So this is interesting simply because you could say that it's like a bija of the prime ground, but it's actually not associated with the element of earth. It's actually associated with the element of sound. So it's kind of all four elements purified, flashing in color, gold. That is what is actually arising. It's the whole luminous nature of reality. So I don't know. Maybe I was totally off on that, but I think that kind of goes with Joshua. Is that kind of where you wanted me to go? I don't know.
Yeah, and it even reminded me of something like kind of like the Trinity, where and because if you stare at something bright long enough, you can kind of see the form that's within it. But at first, it's just a blinding light, right? So, when we look at that story in Daniel, like when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the furnace, um, at first it just appears to be three people, right? But then there's someone else in there with them, right? So it's like, but the longer you stared, you saw that, more the revelation came as your eyes adjust to the light, and you're able to understand it better, So I think that's where the Binah component and things like that kind of become incorporated as you progress up the tree, so to speak.
Well, one thing is really interesting about her iconography is she's always depicted as coming through the sun and the moon, between the sun and the moon, sort of in that empty space. So she's kind of unaffected by the outer luminaries, which of course are this is complicated, but I think it's interesting, and I think it's interesting to even recap this, is that the reason there are often 5 energy centers, quote unquote chakras, in Tantra is because the sun and moon are actually removed. Those are actually considered to be the energy centers of your eyes. So they're part of the sort of things that are both luminous and also receive perceptual light outside of it. So then the 5 other luminaries would be inside. But then you're going to ask, well, I've seen you and Solar go at it in the chat about if there are 7 or 9 luminaries. And of course, that is true. But we would call the 2 shadow planets, Rahu and Ketu, they become the nadis or the channels of the body, the energy centers that allow that sort of luciferic force to both descend from the crown as well as ascend from the foundation, because that is her motion. It is like a strand of DNA. She travels upwards and downwards. And this is how it's also described in Tantra. The dragon is her charioteer. So if they're in a sort of eternal race, you could say, although obviously eternal, that might be a contentious issue because I'm often the anti-eternalist on the panel, but we'll just use it for, literary flavor. But yeah, they're in a sort of perpetual race, and that is their relationship. They're described as siblings, like a perpetual race. He wants to eclipse the sun, but she's like, I can race you. I'm gonna get there first. And so when she passes the sun, because she's invisible light, we don't know. For us, it's imperceptible. We don't recognize it. But when Rahu passes the sun, what happens? It becomes eclipse. So in the darkness, actually, that is when she can really emerge. So it's both processes. So that's what makes her kind of an interesting goddess. And partly the reason I love to bring it up for her in particular, is she is one of the few practices that actually survived from what's called Tongmi, which is esoteric Chinese Buddhism. Now, for Solar's episode with Paul Frederick, I was looking through text trying to find the best. Well, there's a whole category of texts that are actually syncretic Buddhist Taoist. They come from the Mogao caves, which are these kind of like Gnostic repositories. It's like the Great Library, but like times a million. And they're in an oasis in China. And so, anyways, they contain a collection of sutras that are actually syncretic. And so I was looking through some of those and trying to decide what's going to be the best quote for this. And because she exists in both Taoist and Buddhist forms, I just think she's kind of an interesting allegory for the, you know, that the view maybe is what is primordial, but the sort of story around it is what can change. So I don't know. I just think that it's an interesting aeonic turn, and I like the idea that she can emerge from different traditions that saw themselves similar enough, but they also made point of the kinds of conceptual distinctions, the same kinds that we often do in the group. And but ultimately it kind of doesn't matter because we're all sort of to borrow like some language, both from Solar and I have been talking a lot about this, so sorry, Solar. But output from DCS is sort of the mapping of the contours of the experience itself, like experiential wisdom science, which is really what all of these spaces have been about. They have been about, or at least that was my intention, was to be about experiential wisdom science, not unverified personal gnosis, and also not dogmatic cosmology or like ideology or anything. Like, yeah, we've had different movements and we've explored different ideas and different things. Oh, shout out to HB Gardner, Base Pagan, who is coming on the show this weekend. Thank you so much, HB, for coming. I know everybody's like, oh, Jin's gonna have a pagan on. Hell yeah. Of course. So, okay, Solar drop. But anyways, shout out Solar. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he won't. Obviously, I care. Oh, there he is. Okay, so he's coming back. I hate when he drives and talks. That's the worst. He knows that. Anyway, Solar, do you want to say something? Go for it.
No, yeah, sorry, it was just kind of bugging out with the speaker and co-host and stuff like that. Yeah, no, I'm good, man.
All right. Well, okay. Anyways, thank you so much, HB, for coming. Yes, I am having a pagan on the show. We are going to have a great and very respectful discussion. And I think in the new Aeon, there is probably nothing more powerful than a based and respectful discussion. So I'm excited. That's also like about light, though. It's about like the refractory nature of it, and this is also like what I was when you were saying like comes from Bina. Like, yeah, of course, Bina is the restriction of light. So it's like often described by the quote unquote magician as a kind of like train tunnel experience where everything becomes constricted onto a single point. And I wouldn't disagree with that. But Hokmah actually has plays a big role in the way that light is refracted, but because it's refracted through a non-dense matter, which you can liken either to water vapor and or to smoke, can be both, that plays a big role in the refraction. And what does this have to do with like paganism or polytheism? Well, I think that is often what polytheism is kind of like the recognition of these individual kind of refracted rays that appear as a luminous mass, but they're not really a luminous mass, or they're maybe not even distinct at all. Who knows? But I think that is part of it. I think people are seeing it and they're calling the colors individual names, very Hode-like, and so they are identifying them as particularities in the world, but maybe they're just light. Of course, this is just speculative. I'm not out to offend anyone. I am not trying to fight with anyone on the internet anymore, Solar, so don't worry about it. But I'm just saying that I do think that perhaps like the way that the experiences sort of can be articulated in existence appearance actually have to do with people's beliefs. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of jump on that. I welcome it. No one? Okay, Solar, please, thank you.
Yeah, no. I was just gonna say like that description sounds on one hand it's like very dharmic, but on the other hand, like that sort of like understanding of divinity is deeply embedded in the Western traditions as well. You know, like I think in a lot of ways, and again, it's easy to speculate and come to some like kind of vaguely anti-Abrahamic conclusion, right? We're probably all prone to that. But I feel like the way where we understand quote unquote paganism and quote unquote like polytheism is very much conditioned by like the like 40 IQ like retard version of that as imagined by essentially like centuries of like church propaganda, more or less, and also like those traditions started to decay at sort of varying rates depending on like location, like within Western Europe and stuff like that, right? It's not like homogenous across the board as you go through like the 7th to 11th centuries or whatever. um but almost everyone, including like like pagan like thinkers from the classical era all the way through like traditionalist thinkers in the contemporary era like Evola, right, are going to point to the sort of like fully personified, differentiated, like self-subsisting like version, that sort of way of understanding the gods as being a sort of degenerate, not like misunderstanding exactly, but just that it represents like the decay of that like pagan tradition just sort of like happening through a historical process. So yeah, no, I don't know, like that doesn't sound, I feel like a like practicing Neoplatonist would have no problem like nodding his head to what you just said, like how you just characterize things. I don't know.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad that the Neoplatonists are down with me. Um, I've always understood paganism never really through the church lens, but more through I guess I guess I am deeply influenced by certain monistic turns in like Indonesian Buddhism, and how like Samantabhadri is equivalent, even if we say it's not God, but equivalent to God. And obviously there are Sufi ideas that are sort of complicated in this. There are Advaita, like Hindu, Sanatana Dharma ideas that are complicated into this, and of course Christian ideas, Catholic specifically. So I appreciate all of that, but I think that that seems to track with how I've always understood the tree. Is that yeah, it is a place for sort of the philosophy of religion, and if you utilize it for that, either to come to specific conclusions, just speculatively, or to arrive at conclusions of experiential wisdom science. Of course, Hokmah is kind of that sufferer of experiential wisdom science, that yeah, I think there'll be something quote unquote relatively true about that. Joshua, please go ahead.
So I was talking to Eros the other day, I think, about Phanes and the comments or timeline or something or other. So anyway, I was thinking about eggs again because I think he's born from an egg, right? So I was thinking about this zinc sperm egg thing, and so what births Phanes, right? I think Saturn is mentioned as his father, right? So I just thought that was interesting, thinking about it from a biological context. And I was just curious if she had any thoughts about Phanes as a first cause, firstborn, kind of logos figure, perhaps, or the Aeon.
Go for it, Eros.
Well, I think of Phanes as more of like a demiurgic figure, right? Because according to Plato, the demiurge would be this figure where it's not very differentiated from the original principle, or like the all, or maybe the just where maybe all potentiality lies. But as being like one of, or possibly the closest to the one, to me, Phanes has all of the duality inside of him. He has all of the ordering principles, like all 12 of the planetary forces. He kind of holds all of the patterns and all of the things in him and represents kind of just the all. And then he, creates the universe almost, in as a reflection of the divine, but also in his own image in a sense. And so I certainly do see Phanes as like this, demiurgic creator god, but almost also as like a Luciferic kind of character as well. You know, a lot of people do liken him to Eros, and to me that is just, it would make sense that he is in a sense this like libido, you know, the creative force. And it reminded me a lot of what Jin said about the flashing gold and clear, um, you know, entity that represents kind of, I might like totally botch this, Jin. Apologies, but like you said, kind of like all of the elements, and I think you were expanding that maybe out from just elements, but it reminded me a lot of that as well. Like certainly when I think of um, like my own idea of this self-authorship, I think of Fanes a lot, almost like um, being the Fanes of my microcosm.
That was great, Eros, and no, I'm not going to be upset with you at all. Okay, don't worry about that. But what I am worried about, I'll say this, is that I am going to make a little bit of a comparative mythology. Okay, I'm not Solar. I'm not doing this to bug you. I promise. I I tend to think of Phanes as Rahu Ketu. As you said, he does contain all duality within him. Rahu Ketu plays a integral role into the story of the sort of Mithraic figure, Maritzi. Obviously, the Avestan says that their names are similar, Maritzi, Mithras. Both mean the treaty or the contract. Obviously, in the case of Maritzi, her name refers to the sort of invisible contract that is karma. The Zoroastrians have a different idea, and the Hindus have a different idea. But they're all interrelated in a way. But they're, everybody takes their distinct view. So basically, I would say that yes, I agree with exactly what you said, because in Buddhism, obviously Rahu becomes unified, non-dual. He learns to accept both his subtle body, his spirit, and his gross body, material body. And he also wields an arrow, a bow and arrow. I know you were saying he is likened to Eros, but I do think it's interesting because the bow and arrow is also the weapon of Kamadeva, or the god of carnal love or carnal knowledge. So he also wields a bow and arrow. As does Kurakula. Obviously, as the Tahini that I would say is equivalent to the Nuria figure of Path 22, the Aeon of the Daughter. In fact, she also wields a bow and an arrow. The bow and an arrow in Tantric iconography, and I think I've actually explained this before, it has two important secret meanings. It has up to nine layers of meaning, but two secret important meanings. One is magical activity. Yes, you heard me right. The magical activity is represented by a bow and an arrow. It doesn't have any particular quality or nature. It is just all magical activity. Okay, it's the power of magical activity. But it also represents the eclipse of both the sun and the moon. Sometimes it's more important to recognize it as the eclipse of the sun. Sometimes it's more important to recognize the eclipse of the moon. This depends on the other parts of the iconography. Remember, everything is context and text dependent. So other ideas may inform like what the upasaka, what the person looking at the tanka is supposed to do or see. Well, so if the deity is standing upon a moon disk or a sun disk, and you differentiate these by color and by number, you would know that there's a relationship between the solar or lunar eclipse and this deity. But it can also be in and of your own mind. But you can also link it to the greater, gross, outer astrology, and then try and undertake specific works with those deities in your own mind, of course, in the mind palace, and see like then their sort of natures or their potencies or their activities will then actually take shape. So that's kind of an interesting idea. Okay, yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. I think I forgot what I was going to say.
That is okay. Eros, please go ahead.
I recognize that I didn't answer the other part of Josh's question about Saturn. And yeah, originally Saturn and Ananke gave birth to Phanes. And so Ananke is kind of like the cosmic force that defines things so that they can come into form, right? And then Saturn would be like what perfects those things through time. I am curious, Jin, why you relate the north and south node to Phanes.
Because he plays such a similar role. He's very dualistic. Is he is actually the space, like the quote unquote blue black, we would say, blue black space in between the planets and the stars. But also, he is also the planets themselves. I know this is very controversial. Everybody gets annoyed with me when I say this. But in tantric astrology, this is true, so it is true, at least in a conceptual way of understanding. But he is also those, so he's dualistic. He's both matter and the quote unquote voidness, the fifth element, the emptiness. But we also say in Tantra that the fifth element has a secret nature, which is sound. So that's why I was trying to relate it to like the elements converging. And you will often hear Kabbalists talk about Binah, Kabbalist magicians, we'll call them, talking about Binah being the time of silence. Because if it is a constriction of light, it is then also the constriction of sound, as sound is also light. And as we have spoken of many times, maybe not in the room with you, Eros, so it bears repeating perhaps that Hokmah can be best understood as a murder of crows. That's one idea. That's a very tantric way to look at like the sound that emerges from Binah, or not Binah, excuse me, Hokmah, is a murder of crows arising from the smoke. Or another way, and this is more Hebrew Kabbalah way, is that it is the harpsichord, the harps of the choirs of angels emerging from the fluffy white clouds of the sky. I know you think this is all just retardational Abrahamic stuff, but it actually relays really important and deep Kabbalistic ideas. It really does. The little angels, the cherubims and the seraphims playing their little harps in the smoky, and not smoky obviously, in the clouds, that actually relates to Hokmah very much. That's the idea. It's kind of a subtle, it doesn't carry very far. It just carries like a little bit, but there's a little potentiality, a little bit of the wave gets started, like the word, because this is where the words go to die, right? This is a way to understand what Hokmah is. It's the graveyard of the words, where the flux goes when it no longer has the potentiality of fire, when it has been used up by Gevra, or that Gevratic fire. It goes to this smoky place, this Neptunian place, Eros. It's a very Neptunian kind of idea of like this kind of loose boundary. It's sort of unbounded, but just like barely there, barely kept in. The graveyard of the Ketu, the graveyard of the meteorites and the comets, and all of these outer planetary astral bodies. That's why we call it the post-Neptunian sort of region. It kind of accumulates all these little particulates and particles, all of which, so all the elements of creation are there. They're all there, but the sort of ability to put them back together and to sort of reunify the world, it's absent. And if you look at the goddess that's associated with this, she's a widow. So as we talked about on our episode, Eros, she is depicted as Lambo Daraya, or Lambo Dara, she with the pot belly, the cast iron stomach. This is filled with the ocean, the primordial water. She is every drop, looking for her husband. But you see, her husband has given to her all of his knowledge. So he has himself has become the smoke that she eats. That's why she's not able to create more. One part of her story is that she vomits a black egg. From this egg, a little boy emerges. His name is Batuk Bhairava. He's a little boy who rides a black dog. And he wields what? Well, a batuk is a Sanskrit word that means stick, but it actually means it's a very specific kind of stick. It's a stick, a shaman stick. You could call it a magic wand. Maybe he is the first magician. So she vomits him, and he can travel, if you want to think of it through the Sephirah, he can travel through the tree as this kind of figure who beckons us along the marga. It's a very Indian way to think of it. So he is very much like Hokmah, like he is God unmanifest. He doesn't fully exist. He's a child. He's pre-generative even. But we can recognize him in certain kinds of phenomenology. We can recognize him in certain phenomena, as well as we can recognize him in our perceptions. So if you have to think very Indian, you have to just become a Jeet for a minute, and you have to think, okay, I'm in the 13th century. I'm in India. I'm walking along the road of the village. So I'm walking outside the village. What do I come across? Right outside the village, there is a cremation ground. It is every day, every single day. There's a burial. There's a burning. And the bodies are not moved. So you're seeing the corpse. You're seeing the bones and everything. So, what gathers around these kinds of corpse grounds in medieval times would have been what they called pariah dogs or wild dogs. So, one of the ways to remediate a bad Shani or a bad Saturn is to actually feed the pariah dogs that gather at these cremation grounds. Now, you will ask, in what way, Jin, does the feeding of the dogs relate to Shani, to Saturn? Shawnee recognizes Bhairava, Batuk Bhairava, this little boy who rides a black dog through the carnal ground, this little boy covered in ash, this little boy with the face of a demon, wielding a magic stick. Shawnee has taken refuge. Saturn, the great planet, the great, the Lord of Karma, he loves to punish without reward. That's the whole idea in Jyotisha. He takes refuge under this little boy that is black, and who is said to sparkle. Actually, he has a third eye in his head to bring up the samadhi fire idea. That is in the shape of a star sapphire. Well, if you understand Jyotish, Vedic astrology, you know that the gemstone of Saturn is a sapphire. So he sees the supernal star above him, who is Lord Time, Kala Bhairava. Now you're saying, how did this little boy become Kala Bhairava? Well, Kala Bhairava is the 8 movements of time, who is 9, but maybe in this form as the pre-generative child, he actually is kind of ontological time. He is beyond this kind of expansion into time. He's outside of time, you could say, which goes very much along with the emergence from that kind of smoky palace carnal ground we were talking about before, ruled by the widow. She is outside of time. She's in an interstitial time. So the Lord of Time, Shani, he's not really the Lord of Time, but he's the Lord of Karma. He takes refuge in this little boy who is outside of time. So one of the ways to remediate Saturn, the toilless kind of master, the master of toil, is to actually take refuge in this kind of post-conceptual time, the time of magic. It's kind of an interesting idea, and it's a very tantric one as well. I'm sorry, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, pardon me, I had forgotten what I was going to say because I didn't write it down, but then I remembered. So You were talking about Mithraic elements earlier and the concept of the contract and all that. And I was thinking also, because of the conversation about the sperm and ovum and the conception, uh, well, normally a vow would take place before, the conception, right? So you have these words and vows being used with the agreements and all before that would take place. So I just think that alludes somewhat to the mind of God or something that's pre-form, when it's just still sound or something. I don't know. But maybe in the Aries, transitioning from Aries into Taurus, because it's words. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because vowels and vowels to me kind of sound a lot alike, and I think it might be for a good reason. Because without the vowels, sometimes the text is not illuminated fully, right? Because you don't get the nuanced meanings sometimes until that's added.
No, I think this is a great point. I think this is like you want to talk about Nimrod's Tower. We always kind of return back to here, don't we? Every time, in a way, at least this kind of return to the primordial language. What is that? Is it vowels? Is it consonants? Is it syllables? Is it comprehensibles? Incomprehensible? Is it angelic? Is it demonic? Is it of man? Can we recreate it? Is it in English? Is it not in English? Is it in one of these like Kang languages, like that? Like the people on Twitter with like Greek statue PFPs. Is that the language? Is it like a Guananist, like Hyperborean Agartha language? Is it like an Evolian, like against the Magians language? Is it like what is it? What is the nature of it? And I think it's an interesting sort of paradox. Yes, Eros, go ahead.
Well, when we're talking about vowels, it really makes me think of like the planetary vowels, which are so common in like Hellenistic practices, especially like the Greek magici papyrus or whatever. Like they use the planetary vowels all over in there, and it also makes me think of like the Pythagoreans, and how like they believed that the planets made music, like they played their own harmonies, and that we just grew accustomed to their sound. And so I don't know, maybe there's something to that where maybe the vowels could even add more than you know. Oh, and also, Jin, you brought up Neptune the past two shows, and I so want to dive deeper into that with you, maybe tonight. You often mention Neptune in a negative light, which I completely agree with. I think last time you might have even referenced it as like the nature of evil. I don't know, like I'm remembering you saying that, but then also at the same time I'm like, would Jin ever say something so black and white? It's hard to believe, but I think you did.
Well, let's get into it right now, Eros. Let's get into Neptune right now. So, in a tantric way, I relate it to a goddess called Dhumavati, as I said, the smoke eating goddess. Now, you're going to hear from my description of her why I may have said something so dualistic, because it makes a lot of sense. She's a widow. She is the greatest wisdom. How is she the greatest wisdom? She's the greatest wisdom because she exists beyond all conceptual forms of wisdom and all conceptual forms of understanding and all conceptual forms of knowledge. She is inherently post conceptual, the trans Neptunian, we could even call her. She has given up all of material creation. But yet, in her paradox, because all the goddesses have a paradox, if you understand, she can grant any boon, any city, any potency within the material worlds as well as in the Bardo worlds, that you may want, but she cannot form them with the words I want, because when you say I want, she doesn't have anything to give. How can a widow who has given up all materiality, all spirituality, how can she have to give you anything? But she can. Paradox. So how do you access that? To me, that is what Neptune is. It's her and Ketu in this play. Ketu is the potentiality. He is the smoke that arises from when Gevra touches matter, when fire touches the Sephira of other elements. From when he touches Netzach and you could call it the diamond or you could call it the ice. He is the water vapor that arises. That's him in his purified form. He is when the fire arises on touches Yesod and sort of scorches the earth. It can scorch the earth. It doesn't have to. Obviously, these are this arises in consciousness, so we don't have to allow the fire of Gevra to scorch the earth, but it often does. So smoke can arise from that. Of course, at Saturn itself is the kind of lava or the sort of molten earth underneath the crust, underneath the shell. It's always shifting underneath, but you can't tell because it's blackened on top. So it is also the smoke of that. So Ketu is the smoke of all of these things gathered together, and you could say, in a way, it is the true essence or knowledge of the alchemical reaction between fire and all the elements. If she is the goddess of knowledge, or at least the goddess of post-conceptual wisdom, wouldn't she want to know what that smoke is like? And if you can reconstitute the worlds from that smoke, meaning any kind of pralaya, any kind of magic power, and she is the goddess of black magic, be very clear about that. She's trying to reconstitute the primordial sort of word or the primordial sort of sound. And so you could say that she does represent the most Luciferic force in all the worlds, which is also Ketu. So they exist in a kind of dialectical relationship. Sorry, Eros, go ahead.
I was just thinking, because I know that you tend to relate like Uranus and Rahu and Neptune and Ketu, which makes sense in a lot of extent, but it made me think of, again, like yesterday I was reading, I've just been looking a lot into the Pythagoreans, and their idea of duality was kind of the limited and unlimited, which is quite interesting. I guess obviously when we're talking about Rahu and Ketu and Uranus and Neptune, it's more like the duality of chaos in a way that we've talked about before. I know that you had mentioned that you read a book about this at one point. I still really want to read that book to kind of deeper understand that reasoning behind the conflating Neptune and like K2 and Rahu and Uranus, because um when I think of K2, I think of it almost as like a garbage disposal or something, like this black hole in a sense, and I think of Rahu as like a white hole. And when I think of Uranus, I think of it more as like, this lightning that almost expands or like progresses you forward or is like an accelerator. And I would think of Neptune as like, for sure, that almost dissolve into that pre-generative kind of material.
What if I told you the smoke of Ketu was extremely corrosive, that it was acidic in nature? And I think that you're not wrong when you're saying that K2, or not K2, excuse me, Rahu is like a garbage disposal. You have to think of the tree or the sort of planets. Like, just use the Sephirotic system, or the Yetziratic system. Just imagine the tree of life with the planets on them, okay? Rahu can exist down here with us. When he exists down here with us, his body is in front of Venus, or Netzach. Ketu is in front of Hod, or Mercury. Okay? So it's in a dialectical figure, so it's in a figure 8. When we rise in consciousness, he rises with us. When we rise to Tiferatic consciousness, solar consciousness, Ketu exists in Gevra, right? It makes sense. The smoky body exists in the fire, but the physical body exists in the water, right? Like the Chitutalu of the ocean, or whatever they want to call it, the Leviathan. That's exactly what it is. So it's the head of the Leviathan. The physical body exists in Hesed, or Jupiter. Then when we rise again into Dathic consciousness, into non-dual gnosis, it switches. The polarity changes. But this actually makes sense in Lurianic Kabbalah, because there's actually a path between both Geburah and Chokmah, as well as Hesed and Binah, Jupiter and Saturn. So when we rise to Dathic consciousness, we recognize Rahu as a reflection of Saturn. Saturn as like the blue-black cube, we'll call it, just for this purposes, or a gem. We'll call it like a gem, the sapphire gem. So we see in ourselves, you could call it. We see in ourselves that Rahu nature, but he also loves to be there. He also loves to pretend he is actually Shani. He loves to be the devil on our shoulder. That's why he tempts Shani, tempts Saturn. But his tail, of course, exists in the smoky place, the dissolution of the worlds, the trans-Neptunian. Now, this is just the carnal ground. You could call it the ghost ground. But this is where Ketu reaches his final terminus, his last place that he can go. Because there is but one Sephira left, which is Keter. And Keter is Uranus in a way, but it's also not. You can't really put a planet to Keter. What happens is that there are ways to get there, and that is really what the planet is. And just like the planet, I say that Keter can also be Pluto. There's something that both in Uranus and Keter can like break the cycle, you could say. Open the door to samsara. If you watch Sailor Moon, this will make a lot of sense. Sailor Pluto wields the key with the heart. Obviously, I said for the Aeonic keywords, Lamed Mem Dalet, love as the cause of knowledge. Chibi Yusa, she rides the unicorn. Just saying. So I think that what I'm saying, Eros, in this long-winded way, is that I think that Ketu and Rahu are actually inside of us. I think they're also external. I think it's like an external deity, if you want to call it that. But I also, and like in the ecliptic and all of that stuff, like I do agree, I think he exists at all the natures of the world. There are at least 3 sort of bodies of the world, or at least 3 realms of existence. There are really 4, but we're going to just call it 3 right now. And so he exists at all 3 stages, because he's also in us. So as we move up the tree in consciousness, he is also reflected back as part of us. Sorry, Eros, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that would make sense, because Pluto and Uranus are both quite disruptive, and it made me think that maybe they're just like Rahu and Ketu could be almost like in relation to the soul, and Uranus and Neptune to the spirit or something.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. I've never really heard anyone else articulate it, but I think you hit it. Related to the spirit and the soul, and then the other thing is related to matter. And that's how you can also think of it. Like Rahu loves being in the material. I'm not just talking about like the material as in like the human body, the desire body. We're talking about like how Kamadeva has the bow and arrow, and then Rahu also wields a bow and arrow. There's a reason for that. In Buddhism, Rahu actually overtakes the role of Kamadeva. He actually kills the god of desire and takes his mount. It's a makara. A makara is something that's like a dragon, a small dragon, maybe you could say, but it's also can be depicted as a dolphin or a whale, depends. So he rips the head off the mount of Kamadeva, Lord of carnal desire, carnal knowledge, and he puts it on a war pike. And then sometimes when he's depicted, he'll be carrying around that severed head as like a victory pike. So but it makes sense in a Buddhist way, right? Because he conquers desire. What's a better way of conquering desire than showing that you conquered the mount of the, god of desire? But he also takes his bow and arrow. And then in some ways, you could say ontologically, or at least cosmologically, he becomes himself the Lord of Desire. So, but he tries to conquer that. That's the whole point of Buddhism, is that you're saying, okay, I'm going to point higher. I'm going to point, like, I'm going to, go all the way Buddha nature. I'm going to try and like transmute. If you're a tantric, you're trying to transmute the desire into something else. That's very Uranian in a way, in a tantric way. It's very Rahu. You're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna take this impulse and I'm going to do this specific sadhana to this specific goddess. I'm gonna channel this kind of energy. If you're looking at Rahu, then you're talking about Chinnamastika. So it's like Rajasic energy. It's sexual impulse. It's sexual. It doesn't have to be sexual though. That's honestly just one layer of Chinnamasta, the goddess with the severed head. But it's a good because everybody kind of gets it from that point. But it's not just that. It can be like different kinds of understanding. People will, when you look at the icon, there will be people with the levels of understanding. The sexual is actually the outer density, the outermost density, actually the least important. So everybody gets fixated on that, and that's why that they put it as the sort of the main iconography. It's so people get trapped in the actual like way it's presented rather than the way it's meant. It's a winnowing basket. So teaching you like how to really understand the deeper meanings. But so she is the liberation, the victory over the self. That is what she's even called. She who is victorious over her own nature. Her nature is what? Gnosic, post-Gnosic, meaning that she clarifies rajas, lust, tamas, sin, and sattva also, meaning purity, that she's post-conceptual. She goes outside of the knowledge of what can be. She becomes, to use like my language, diamond thunder. She is able to travel upwards in that red flash, to bring that up again, about like the MK and the red flash of light. She travels upwards in the red flash of light. You can say that she leaves that hyperspace kingdom, and you can also say she comes back down. Tantra has both levels of understanding. Indian Tantra would say she comes back down. Buddhist Tantra would say she's outside the cube. Depends, again, it's very view dependent kinds of takes, right? Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, listening to you guys discuss Neptune earlier, and it got me thinking also about Saturn, and an idiom or an axiom came into my mind, being trapped between the devil and the deep blue sea, as in two malefic things, or a cliff and a pack of wolves, which made me think of maybe the moons of Saturn even being included in that. But and then there's like a saving grace, perhaps, or a Deus ex machina element as well, that maybe we can attribute to the fortune of Jupiter or something like that, being the saving grace from a malefic, uh, you know, placement or some type of opposition that one is up against, right? So as you guys were discussing that, Neptune, I was thinking of as like the deep blue sea, and sometimes people want to characterize Saturn as the devil. So that phrase came to mind, and it reminded me of the Tool song, "The Grudge," right? anyway, and drags you down like a stone or lifts you up like a child. Well, like the child element was Jupiter, right? Because 9 of the 10 children were consumed, but he was delivered, right? So it's like got this salvational kind of element, which is Shin, one of the mother letters after all. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
That's perfect, Joshua. Literally, like honestly couldn't have asked. 11 out of 11 contribution for that. The devil in the deep blue sea. That's perfect, because that is what it is. That's exactly what it is. Like if you're sitting at Tiferet, just think of it. Okay, so if you see a tree and it has death, that's wrong. Death is forged in your own consciousness, but you can place the tree, you can place the Sephira on the tree for conceptual purposes only. Because that's obviously all at Yesod, that's all inside your own mind, that's all there. You can rise to Tiferatic consciousness, but you have to come back to the primordial ground, which is material reality. We all recognize that pretty much. Like, yeah, maybe you can get out of here and into Samsara if you're like Mahasiddha in like the 8th century, but like in reality, most people are coming back down after they have higher experiences. But for conceptual purposes, we'll just say that you're sitting at death. Okay, well, just for conceptual purposes. So you're looking over at your left shoulder, which is Binah. There's a reason that you're looking at Binah first, right? The constriction of light and sound. You have to travel through the materiality of the body before you can be liberated into the spirit, which is on your, as you're approaching the tree in this way, in the way I'm describing it at least. Maybe your view is different when you are actually up there, and this is probably what is disorienting and causes people to have different kinds of experiences or to relay different experiences when they're up there, because perceptually you're kind of flipped up and down, and your left and right are probably different. Your cardinal directions are probably different. Your true north is different, which is why you have like different understandings and perceptions of what the true north really is. Of course, we're more of a Hyperborean space, so we say, of course, it is the Big Dipper, right? But everybody has different systems, so that's something to think about. So, okay, you're looking over your left shoulder. You're seeing the black hole, the black sort of vortex, the verticality. It's like this kind of cone shape that's like pulling you deeper and deeper into density, deeper and deeper through the lead, like a meat grinder. That's how you have to think of it. But you're just perceptually seeing it. You're perceptually seeing it. It's densifying. It's turning your thoughts into a diamond. Slowly, 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 slowly. But it can actually function also as like a very pressurized environment, right? But it's black, it's blue black, okay? Then you, once it's compressed you, once you're okay, once you say, okay, I give up this material body. Okay, I'm not just the materiality. I'm more than that. There's something else. Okay? After the compression of Saturn is done, the flattening, you could say, you are able to travel as a spiritual body over to Neptune, which is also why that path is described as fire, because you are like physically destroyed, but you're not destroyed. Your spirit is still alive. So that is where your spirit goes. This trans-Neptunian carnal ground, the smoky carnal ground filled with crows. That makes a lot of sense. You don't have any relationship, context, words to describe this place that is neither like heaven nor hell, somewhere in between, a Bardo realm, one might say. Right? And that is where the Bardo realm kind of would go. If you're really doing like a kind of parallel cartographic map, that's where Bardo would go in Hokmah. Yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, and never really thought about it till just now, but bards themselves probably are a bit like a shaman in a sense that maybe they're bringing back from the bardo some of these primordial bijus, if you will, or songs, things that so that they're not lost, right? These things that are preserved in some way. And when we say that word preserve, it brings to mind like salt, and how that's used a lot of times in stories to be symbolic of preservation. And one of the 3 mothers in terms of alchemy usually is assigned salt, after all, right? But and anyway, just wanted to share that.
Well, wouldn't that make sense to have Dhumavati represent salt in one state? Not salt of like salts of salts, but maybe salts of a different element. Because she swallowed all the salt water, the primordial water, so all the salt is inside of her. All that exists is the flux, meaning the burnt metallurgical whatever it is. And what did we talk? We had a whole multiple series of spaces about the nature of flux and what that was. Well, what flux really is tree resin. That's the oldest sort of mineral metallurgical ingredient. Is on for welding. The original OG ingredient is frankincense or pine tar, or or something from a tree, exudate. So when you burn it, when you do the welding, you're engaging the metallurgical process. The tree sap is burning away. It's fragrant. It's burning with the metals. It becomes an amalgam. It kind of evaporates. It's kind of little particles of metal in the air, right? So it still exists as the elements that it is, but it maybe hasn't taken on, like, it can't be you can't just like have like an air filtration device and like sort of recapture all the elements and then mix it up and then say, okay, this is material reality again. It's not enough. It's just like by itself, it represents something, but it doesn't have any context. That's why I like to call it the graveyard of the words. It's where the words go and they die in outside of their context. And what a poet does, or what a bard does, is they draw the words from Hokmah into where we start to name things, which is Hode. But there's not a direct path from Hokmah to Hode, from Neptune to Mercury. So you have to travel through Gevra. Gevra then blazes down through the sun, looks at Venus. His gaze is fiery and passionate, and he wants her. He lusts after her, and when he lusts after her, he exudes what? Fire. So he kind of blasts her with light, you could say, effulgence, and she's like a diamond, so her body illuminates, so the diamond illuminates, and it creates what? The world. But it's all bullshit too, because it's all the refraction. We can't even tell where the original word, light, idea, impulse comes from. It's all blinding. And that is what the poet, the bard, the prince, the magician at Hode, that is what he has to contend with. That's why it's so important, and we've always pushed in the spaces, at least not pushed, but discussed.
Are you still there?
Oh, my apologies. I must have dropped for a second. Okay, so where was I? Did I say anything about Yesod and how we have to focus on Yesod and drop down into the primordial consciousness in order to rise back up?
That,
Did you hear
I don't
that?
remember you saying that, but yeah, let's just start there.
Okay. Okay, let's start there. I apologize. So you're looking at the relationship. I'll just recap it quickly. You're looking at the relationship between Hokmah and Hode. There is no direct path from Hokmah to Hode, so it has to go Hokmah, Gevra, Tiferet, Netzach, Netzach to Hode, Hode to Yesod. So you have to bring all of that bullshit, all of the effulgence, all of the light, all of the sound, all of the ideas, both yours and not yours. You have to bring that back down. And if you don't have an understanding of text, you don't have an understanding of Binah, you don't have a kind of reference guide, that's very much been a guide to what you are doing, a kind of textbook example. Textbook is very Binah, a very Saturnian. You don't have a guide, well, it's going to be hard to put the letters back together again, like Humpty Dumpty kind of thing. So that's basically what it is. So that's what the bard is. The bard is he in front of him appears all of these words, the same with the poet. The poet and the bard are one character. Drawing from Hokmah, but it's not a direct route, is what I'm trying to say. But so, and this is also true of the magician. The magician is also trying to draw from the carnal ground of ultimate reality, right? This trans-Neptunian wasteland, and trying to see where the primordial word is. But does the primordial word even exist in the Neptunian, carnal ground? Probably not. Because if it did, then all of reality would collapse in on itself, which you could also say is true. But in tantric way, it can't be true because she is interstitial time. So she might collapse in on herself. Her time in the Leela, her time in the cycle might collapse in on itself, but the reality does not itself disappear, right? She comes, like, we still continue on with the cycle of samsara, etc., etc. So we know that there are other forces. We talked about first cause, and in Tantra, it's really interesting. You have a difference between the prime mover, which is that which is the destruction of cosmic time, is the prime mover. But first cause is Tara, who gives birth to the world. So the act of generation and creation both, that is what is first cause, which is really interesting. Very different than a lot of Gnostic stories, very different than a lot of Western religions, right? Okay, Joshua, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I was thinking, since we're discussing these elements and the topic of the space and all, the function of a demiurge or archon, whatever you want to call it, what was the purpose then to disturb the paradise? So if this element that's placed there is then producing other things like the suffering that we humans go through, redemption arcs, those sorts of things. Whereas in a paradise, there would be no change. Things are kind of stagnant, perhaps energetically speaking. So it's almost, when you said prime mover, it kind of made me think of that, where there's a role associated with this. Some of the malefic uh, associations, like the planets that we consider malefic, maybe have a role. They're kind of moving things along in a way, right? And um, so I was just thinking about that, like the role of that, and without it, we would have less virtues in the world. Of course, there would be less suffering, of course, as well, I'm sure. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of maybe illustrate that point, maybe a little bit.
That's a great point, Joshua. I think the idea is like, okay, if we want to exist in utopia, where is that? Different people have different ideas. That's the whole problem. That's where my sort of metaphor of the differentiation of light, the refraction, calling them all by different names as polytheists. I'm obviously not a polytheist, but I'm saying for people who out there who are polytheists, calling the light by different names. It's the same thing with ideas, because ideas really are also light, right? Epinoia. So they're really coming from that right pillar. That makes sense. So a lot of the ideas of utopia come from Netzach and come from Hesed, right? Because those are both benefic planets, Venus and Jupiter, of course. Venus, you could say, is the garden, like the place where we first arise as animals. And by animals, I'm not putting us down. I'm saying we don't know anything. We don't have any conceptualization outside of the garden. We are naked in our awareness. We don't have a kind of higher knowledge. So we come across this beautiful, we'll call it the oasis of palm trees, which is very Kabbalistic. We come across an oasis of palm trees. In the oasis, two trees exist, two pomegranate trees exist. One is called the tree of life and death. One is called the tree of knowledge. Which one do we eat from? Well, we are human, so we eat of both. So then we are able to rise in agency and consciousness and luciferic flame and spark, and we are able to become the bride of Malkuth. Yes, even if you're a boy, you become the bride of Malkuth, and you look over the threshold, the bridal threshold. Remember, this is a very, like, we're talking about like very desert culture here. So we walk through the bridal threshold and we look over like a cliff, like the Fool card of the Abyss. We look at the sky and at all the stars, and we see for the first time the true names of things, which we may or may not know, but we accept that they have things outside of ourselves that we do not know, but they have true names. So this is the first Stargate of the Magician. So I think what you're saying, Joshua, sounds really relevant to me. And if you have a follow-up for that, please go ahead.
No, actually, I think that done a pretty well, good job. Except that maybe I would add that when thinking about maybe the path in the chaos, or um, the the disintegration of the logos or whatever, that the paths are kind of placing that into an order, like like something that's been explored before, and so there is a way, to navigate these things, these different between the Sephiroth, or planetary influences, etc. So when thinking about the logos in that manner too, like you said, the bard collects the songs from the bardo, but has to arrange them in a certain order, right? Um, for them to have a coherence, or a structure, I guess, that maybe works. So when I guess with the runic texts, or like the Elder Edda, one of the ways to authenticate an old story was not just the words and the letters, but also the cadence and the meter of the recitation. So it was like a form of cryptography or encryption, almost like to authenticate something, So there might be something else there about measure and meter and all that, and how that relates to the tree. I've never really thought much about that, because some of the paths are different lengths in relation to one another. So when you think about it, Eros was mentioned in the music of the spheres earlier. Well, a lot of them have planetary associations, so you probably could assign notes to paths in Sephiroth as well, perhaps.
Okay, so you made some really interesting points, one of which I should have addressed way earlier when the music of the Sephira Eros brought that up. So there is a reason, even though it seems ridiculous to us, as like in 2026, there was actually a reason why like Agrippa assigned the planetary choirs to each of the Sephiroth. Because, why? Because every planetary choir plays different instruments. Woodwinds, harps, as we talked about for Hokmah, drums, percussion, all the different instruments. They can be, because there's a sonic quality to words. There's a sonic quality to the vowels. There's a sonic quality to consonants. There's a sonic quality in between. The silence has its own sonic quality. This is very important in Dharma. The space between the words. So one thing I will say, Joshua, is that what you're saying is very interesting, and obviously a lot of magicians, contemporary and historical, have been very focused on finding these kind of like primordial, quote unquote, words, which I would argue we already know. They already exist in Buddhism, so don't get too worried about it. Don't get stuck on it. They don't belong to any one people. They're not racial in origin. I know nobody likes to hear this, but they're just free. They're liberated in space. We just have to recognize them for what they are. Okay, so enough, I know, enough kumbaya bullshit. Everyone's like, okay, Jin, shut up. Okay. So, enough with Kezaria, or whatever.
I think Eros had her hand up, by the way.
Yes, okay, Eros, please go ahead. I apologize.
Well, if we're talking about like 2 points and then a line between 2 points, kind of like you had brought up, Josh, it's interesting because when you're studying like Hellenistic astrology and stuff, there are like for example, 7 hermetic lots, which I am working on a video about. And when you're looking at these things, it's like, okay, what's the rationality behind this? And right, because they'll take 2 different planets or 2 different points in your chart, and then they kind of look at the distance between them, and that distance between them is more important than the 2 points or planets in your chart. Like, they tell the actual story, they have the actual meaning. And it really goes back to that Pythagorean thought of, they saw the universe in a lot of a different way than we do, where, you have like it's all about, in a sense, the relation between things. You have the one, and then you have the duality, and that becomes the Trinity. And to get like meaning out of that, there has to be a relationship between 2 different things. So it's almost like everything was relation oriented. And then when you start looking at this idea of coherence, I think that that's so important. And I see it as very Venusian, right? So if you're talking about like harmony and almost things working together, it almost seems as if everything orients towards a universal coherence. Humanity in general kind of orients towards this coherence. You can see how like philosophy and like this cultural general outlook can kind of grow and change based on the common philosophy at the time. And people really orient a lot of meaning and their values around these things. And to me, it's the same thing with us and our souls at a microcosm level. And so I guess I forget the main point I was trying to make there, but I think that, there is a lot of depth there to that idea of paths and relations between 2 principles.
Well, Eros, I don't know if you know this. That was so great. Thank you so much, of course. Obviously, yeah, Josh was right to give you snaps, we'll call it. But those are the themes of the space. Those are the themes of the Grey Lodge. Relationality between 2 objects. So I've called it geontological relations, which I've argued is the same thing as karma. So everybody better get fucking Dharma pilled. No matter how good or evil you think you are, karma is real. Now, is karma the same thing as what everybody thinks it is? No. It's much more like what Eros said. It's our relationship between 2 objects. We are object 1, and the other object we can also say is 1. So it's the Aleph Aleph problem, the Aleph Aleph paradox from Kabbalah. So we have to learn to resolve the paradox in between the self and the self, or the object and the object. How do we resolve it? Well, there's multiple different ways. We try and resolve it in a kind of kinship relationship. That's the best way. Karma, kinship, obviously starts with a K, so obviously I would like it. It's magic, right? But yeah, we try and resolve it through good relations. You want to achieve good relationality. You don't want bad relationality. Bad relationality is like the relationality of like Gen X and boomers and like all those people. We want to achieve a kind of stability, even if it's neutrality. A neutrality is still better than animosity, right? It's just like obvious. So this is between us and like the mountains, each other, I know this is very kumbaya for me. The geological forces in the world, the spiritual forces in the world, the spirits of the trees, the spirit, okay, all the things. But we also want to make sure that we recognize the potentiality of the Luciferic force, the Luciferic flame, and we have to understand how to wield that without being destructive upon the karmic relationships. Now, I personally think this is the Aeonic idea. So I think Eros touched on pretty much every single point that I would like really emphasize as like as an Aeonic space, as a space that discusses Aeonic ideas or Aeonic ideals. It's like be Dharma pilled, at least in one capacity. Karma is real. That is what the Pythagoreans were talking about. They may not have called it that, but that is essentially what they're talking about. But then there's also something that I want to mention, what Josh brought up. You have to remember that a lot of people's understanding of the tree is wrong. And when I say wrong, it doesn't mean that you can't study their version of the tree, but like the Hermeticists get something deeply wrong. The words do not stay on the paths as such. Light and sound are what travel through the paths, meaning that the words actually are dynamic and travel through the paths both up and down in the force of a lightning strike. Okay? So nobody's tree is perfectly complete. The Jews do have the best trees, or you could say the Tantrics have a good tree as well. But the Jews generally have the good trees, but the good trees are not the well-known tree. That's just the tree we use for conceptual sort of like norm grids. But it's like the tree's a lot more can be a lot more splendorous than the Normgoid tree. But the Normgoid tree is still good. We really like that tree. It's a really good hermeneutic for just initial learning. And of course, if you listen to me, you can also add the Yetziratic associations, meaning the planetary powers. That's perfectly fine. Just understand the planetary powers as being klipothic. That does not mean evil. That simply means physical in this case. Because the Sephira are much more like what? Stars. So that goes also to the point of the words on the paths. We are also stars. So man, I'm not saying men, man is of the paths. That's why the aeonic number is path 22 plus ultra 22. Because the aeons arise on the path. Who also arises on the path? Man. Man arises on the marga. Very easy, very basic. So if we arise on the marga, the aeons arise in our own minds, then we wield the words. That's the true Luciferic force. Okay, Joshua, please go ahead.
Wow, I think I just stumbled on something because of what she said earlier. Eros was talking about the distance between the 2 points actually having more significance than the 2 points themselves. Well, I was thinking about how that applies to all the, because that was Greek, I think she said. So thinking about how that applies to all those stories and about the constellations themselves. And so if you look at the asterisms, the distance between the two stars, like you said, they're Sephiro, right? Well, it's just like the paths on the tree. um, it's the distance between those two stars actually tells a story, right? And depending on how long it is maybe is significant. So that might be their own version of a twilight language, which is a language of the stars. And by the way, the logos, in some cases, I've seen it associated with the stars in certain constellations. So now I'm going to re-examine that and look at the distance between the two stars in relationship to which letter it is, to see if I can glean a further meaning with the twilight significance. Because that's like a layer that's not written, except it's written in the stars, of course. But so I really appreciate the insight you guys granted me with that realization.
Let me mind fuck you even more, Joshua, tonight. I'll let Eros go first. Sorry, Eros, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, it is too, like a big part of that, especially in the astrology aspect, is time, right? So if it's a shorter line, then it's shorter amount of time. If it's a longer line, then it's a longer amount of time of that relationality culmination point, I guess.
Okay, I love that you brought up this idea of time. Time exists at 3 layers, at least within the 3 world structure, right? There's our time, which is at Yesod, which is the Yesodic time, which is time within our minds. So, how we perceive and understand time in relation to how we move through it. There's time, which is the recorded analogical time, which is Hod-like. And then there's also the time of Binah, which is the cosmic time. But we actually know that there's a 4th layer. There's ontological time, but we'll pretend it doesn't exist right now. So basically, a lot of the ideas of magic are to get outside of cosmic time. Well, Tantra says this is possible. We have to travel through the space of the stars. Very interesting, because obviously Joshua brought up the stars. So there's an idea in Tantra that actually the stars don't speak the primordial language, but the stars reverberate, meaning their frequency of the light. Remember, sound is also light. So maybe the stars reverberate with the sound of the primordial word. So obviously there have been a lot of people who believe this. But we say in Tantra, this is something really interesting, for Buddhist Tantra at least, is that the word self-combusts, meaning that in our own perception, we self-combust the bija, so it does not pollute the sort of reverberation or refraction of the other stars, you could call them, within the primordial ground, which is, of course, also in our mind. I know this is getting very meta, but maybe that is part of like our karmic connection as well, is to like make sure that we self-combust the word before we leave that kind of empty space. This would be a very Buddhist way to think of it, right? Because we don't want to implicate the karma of ourselves in the karma of others, but we might want to utilize the bija to purify our karmic connections. We're using the sound, like you have to think like in Buddhism how they use the bell. Well, think of like karma as all these golden threads. Gold is a good conductor of energy, right? So, but you need a very subtle energy to sort of uh, tighten or strengthen, we'll call it strengthen the golden threads because they're so thin, they're almost invisible. So we wield the bija or the sound like a bell, and the bell is what purifies those kinds of threads. That is exactly how it's thought of, interestingly. So, anyways, Joshua, please go ahead.
Well, what you were saying there just reminded me of sonoluminescence, when sound is used to captivate like an air bubble and it's held there and intensified. It'll eventually start to change shape and it'll go through all these different cymatic frequencies and shapes until finally it collapses on itself and it'll emit a very bright light, flash of light. And so some people have speculated that maybe that's how stars are kind of formed and maintained, is, that maybe when um, the word was spoken in the beginning and everything was created, that maybe that, sonoluminescence kind of created some of these stars that we do see. I just wanted to mention that.
Well, if you are a tantric Buddhist, you've already believed this. This is basically how we believe that you know, things arise. Like as we talked about at the very beginning, is like everything arises from the black ground. Some people say it's gold. Some people say it's pink. Some people say it's light. This nature of spectral light itself, right? What is spectral light if not invisible? So can we even put a name on it? Well, some people say no. Some people say yes. Some people say let's put the primordial words onto it. Let's map the primordial system, the perennial system, the axial system. Well, if you're an axialist, then we don't really worry about mapping. Why? It's not that mapping isn't fun and important and autistic. It is, of course, all of those things. It is important that we try and do it so then other people can sort of build off the work that we do. But we also want to emphasize that it's not the point. The point isn't to reinvigorate the lost Hyperborean, 20 million years ago, planetary, solar, golden age. That's not the point. The point is to find the words for ourselves, rectify ourselves in our own consciousness, bring the words and pass them on to the next generation, to our sons, if you want to call it that, in like a more kinship relationship kind of idea. And we want to pass them along, or pass them along to each other, to your brothers, right? Because we've always said we're a very like speculative Kalachakra space. So we have our sister sky wives and our brother husbands, right? So we pass the bijas along to each other in hopes that we all pass them down, and then we can understand the aeonic shift, because the words also change. If you're an axialist, the words, the bijas, the primordial seeds also change, but they don't change too. So it's something of a dualistic nature. There's a grouping of these primordial words, 64. That's at least a tantric way to think of it. And so every kalpa or aeon has specific bijas, specific seeds associated with it. We're going into a silver aeon, but the bijas are tiferatic, solar. So how do we understand that? And then those bijas become the most powerful. But what happens when everybody starts reciting those bijas? Well, as a chaos magician, it makes me really interested to find out. But as a Dharmic practitioner, it also worries me, because if people take it in the wrong view, then, well, I guess what will be will be. And it's better that people build the good karma now, practice the solar bijas. And that doesn't mean worship Vishnu, obviously. Don't worship Vishnu, please. I mean, if you're going to do it, just don't tell me about it. Don't worship the Abrahamic gods so much. I understand. I believe in Hashem too. I get it. I really do. I don't have a problem with Shiva or Hashem or the like those gods. Like, there's no problem. My thing is like Buddha nature. Let's go higher. I think it's the Aeon of Man. I think we should just go higher. I'm gonna worship the Dakinis, the Sky Wives. That seems more fun to me. I'm just saying. But I have no daddy issue. Like, I'm not like, we'll talk about like there's certain, well, quote unquote pagans who shall remain headless, who believe themselves like that, just clearly have such bad daddy issues, and like that's why they're pagan. Like, that's not, we don't seek to be antinomian against the tree. The tree itself is not positive or negative. It's just like, it's just knowledge, just death. The whole point is to get to death, is to get to non-dual gnosis. So, like, why are we don't project our issues on the tree. We try and resolve ourselves with the tree. That is like really the true initiatic path. If you want to use a really basic normgroid example, and you can explain it through Dharma, you can explain it through Tantra, you can explain it through Gnosticism. That's what we're so lucky, that we can exist in time and space and have these kinds of gonzo, wild, pink and gray radio hours on the internet. That's what the whole thing of the Grey Lodge started as. It's like to pass along the message. And maybe that is the whole point of it. Maybe that's like, there is no project greater than the Aeon of the Daughter. Maybe that is the whole point of like everything I've ever done. I'm not going to cry, but I might a little. But it might be true though, in a way, right? Because it's like, what is more luciferic than passing along the spark of higher knowledge to other people, whether they understand it or not? Just saying. Okay, Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I was thinking, you mentioned earlier about when humans didn't know anything, like when we were kind of less knowledgeable and more like an animal, I guess, in that Edenic state. Um, you mentioned that maybe there were pomegranate trees, but I've thought maybe it was a fig tree, because in the story they cover themselves with a fig. And so fig appears alongside Buddha a lot in his stories. So I was just curious if you could draw any parallels between, maybe the significance of a fig tree, and what Buddha was doing. But also the whole concept, because even the Adam and Eve story is very famous, right? So the stories that are told about us or our achievements or our exploits, etc., as individuals are it's an assemblage of logos that preserves that person's memory. So in a way, Adam and Eve have achieved immortality in that story, if nothing else, right? So anyway, I just kind of wanted to illustrate that point real quick. And again, about fig.
Well, this is really interesting because even the fig of Buddha, or where he is, the Bodhi tree, it is also related to a tree called the Rudraksha tree, the tree of Rudra. Now, this is not the tree of the Vedic god Rudra. Okay, be very clear about this. It's not the same. It's the god of Rudra by Rava, Shiva of the nighttime color, blue-black. When he becomes Mahakala, greater time. Interesting, right? So the Bodhi seeds, when you have a Bodhi seed mala, are nice and smooth because it's like the nature of the mind. You're smooth-brained monkey on the carnal ground. But if you are tantric, you are a grainy and veiny brained monkey, maybe not a monkey, maybe a demon on the carnal ground, like Rudra, right? That's why Rudra looks so ferocious, because he has like his pitfalls and contours and valleys and crevices and secrets. So the whole idea, I know people will be like, what? I can't believe the Indians were this smart. They were. Ye who prey on the Rudraksha malas in hopes that you will pray enough, that you will wear down the seeds, and they will then become a smooth Rudraksha seed, which at its appearance, existence appearance, outer appearance, becomes likened to a Bodhi seed so much that the outer appearance cannot actually tell you what kind of tree it came from. This is a true story, a real story, a real Buddhist, like tantric story. You practice tantra so much with this one thing, you smooth brain yourself and become a Buddha. So
It's
one
kind of
idea.
like
Sorry, Josh.
retard maxing, then, huh?
I mean, there is something probably to be said for it, right? And also something to be said for what is the tree of knowledge and what is the tree of good and evil, or life and death, either or. Well, there is an interesting idea that the tree of knowledge is, of course, the pomegranate tree. But the tree of life and death, which is, of course, one tree with an extensive root system, of course, is a fig tree. This would make sense, especially if you understand that all fig trees are, in essence, parasitic, meaning that they require the support of a greater tree to grow to the heights of heaven itself. So, something to think about, that knowledge is the true tree, which is what I always try and tell you guys, and what all the hosts, Joshua, Solar Exile, Matmara, Eros. I haven't quite converted her to non-dualism yet, but I'm working on it. Anyways, thank you guys all for coming. I know this was a little while away from our usual. We were doing it so hardcore for so many months, and I'm really glad that we got to do this. In a way, the spaces are the most special. The Friday Night Gnostic Mass spaces, whether we call it Friday Night Gnostic Mass or I give it some weirdo title, they really are our Gnostic Mass. So sometimes it's good to pay homage, whatever. It's sometimes good to pay. I mean, it's always good to pay. Um, we give the aeons our praise, I guess. Love, will, and life. Love is Nuria, will is Seth, and life is Zoe. which we referenced in this episode because we discussed the goddess who rides the corpse cart, who is invisible light. Yes, Murtzi, the figure of Mithras. You could say that that is the same, that is Zoe. It's invisible light. It's the treaty relationship between all things. How do we govern the treaty relationship? Well, we have the two polarities, will and love, the son and the daughter, the solar and lunar marriage. So you have to figure that shit out. That's what the whole Aeon is about. So I know it won't be like the normie religion, the religion of the normgroids, and maybe it's not even a religion at all. Maybe it's just the Aeonic framework of how they wanted to relay to those who know. Just speculatively, of course. So take of the seeds and do as thou will. And go in non-dualism, bodhicitta, and the middle path. Meditate, and don't be afraid to use magic against people who fuck with you. But don't use magic against people who aren't implicated in your greater star game. That's my advice. So with that being said, thank you to Joshua, William Birkin, Dr. William Birkin, El Kami, Cassandra, the voice of the Aeon, we'll call it, Trenorist, one of my bestest and favoritist mutuals. Thank you so much. John, Ihaye Asher Ihaye, have not seen you for a long time, but thank you so much for coming. I'm very glad that you came. Vanessa, of course, Truth and Dies. Check out Vanessa and her Etsy store. Longtime supporter of ours and mine. Thank you to Solar Exile, our brother, our Matt Murrah, our social media coordinator, Eros Up, who's the current darling of our content creation now. That is the Grey Lodge. I'm just kidding. I love all my Skywives very equally, as they all know. Cassandra number 1, Vanessa number 2. That's only because Vanessa has a boyfriend. So that's the only reason Vanessa's number 2. No other reason. See, they're all equal, really, in my eyes. Anyways, but just try and be tough, I guess. Like take the Gevratic fire and wield it like Batuk Bhairava. Wield it like a magic wand. And the part of Gevra is not what people on the internet tell you it is, which is like beating everyone up with like your flaming baton. Actually, the act of Gevra is knowing when to employ and exercise the fire, and having extremely strong self-stability, being a stabilized force in and of yourself. That is how to wield the bow and arrow. So don't go to extreme. No extremes. We're putting the extremes away, but we're also saying fuck consensus reality. The Archon shall not live, unfortunately. And we're not afraid of their shadows anymore. Those are my Aeonic words for you tonight. Okay. Thank you guys for coming. Amazing space. Really fun. Let's do it again really soon. Peace out, my Nagas.